I used to think God was ignoring me. I prayed, I begged, I fasted, I cried, I even screamed. But nothing happened. No answers, no signs, just silence. And in that silence, something in me broke. Or maybe it wasn't breaking. Maybe it was being cleaned. Maybe it was God removing the noise I had mistaken for his presence. Maybe he wasn't being silent. Maybe he was being surgical. We expect God to answer like people do. Loud, immediate, obvious, on schedule. But God doesn't shout over your chaos. He whispers underneath it. He doesn't rush to impress you. He waits. He waits until your heart is quiet enough to recognize it's him. Until your soul is still enough to receive, not just react. If your life is too loud, too desperate, too full of movement, you won't hear him. Not because he's far, but because you're tuned into everything else. Fear, plans, guilt, pressure, your own voice echoing back at you like it's divine. We confuse adrenaline with clarity, movement with faith, noise with connection. We fill the void with effort and call it obedience. But God speaks in the spaces we avoid, in the pauses, in the quiet, in the ache you try to silence. And most of us never stay there long enough to hear him, because silence feels like failure, because waiting feels like weakness, because stillness feels like giving up. No one teaches you how to sit in God's silence without assuming it means rejection. We aren't taught to endure the stillness, we're taught to fill it. So we start spiraling. Maybe I failed. Maybe he left. Maybe he's punishing me. Maybe I'm broken. Maybe I'm too far gone. But what if the silence isn't distance? What if it's depth? What if he stops speaking the way you expected? Because he's tuning your soul to a new frequency? Because he's teaching your heart a new language? Every believer meets a moment when God hides, not because he's cruel, but because you've outgrown the voice you used to follow. Because he wants you to walk by knowing, not by noise. Now he wants you to know him, not just hear him. He's not building followers. He's forming lovers. He's forming listeners. We say we want to hear God, but we fill every second with noise. Music, podcasts, advice, sermons. Even our prayers are full of our own voice, of our own agendas, our checklists, our panic, and we call that connection. But maybe it's just control. Maybe it's spiritual busywork, disguised as devotion. Real connection is presence, stillness, not feeling something, but being with someone. God doesn't compete with your distractions. He doesn't force your focus. He waits. He waits until you're too tired to pretend, too weak to impress, too quiet not to notice he was never far. His voice isn't always a word. Sometimes it's a pull, a tension in your chest, a peace that makes no sense, a door closing you didn't want to lose, a pause in your spirit when everything says go. And if you're waiting for fireworks, you'll miss the whisper. If you're chasing signs, you'll overlook the shift, because his biggest moves often look like nothing, until they look like everything. The miracle doesn't come with a drum roll. It comes in a moment you almost dismissed. God's voice often echoes in hindsight. What feels like silence now reveals itself as direction later. You'll look back and realize he was speaking the whole time, just not in the way you expected. We don't recognize his voice because we've never learned to stay still long enough to hear something. That doesn't sound like us. We confuse his tone with our trauma. We measure his presence by our productivity, and the more religious noise you carry, the harder it gets, because you start believing he only speaks through blessings, through pastors, through goosebumps, through open doors. But God speaks through donkeys, through storms, through wounds, through silence. If you only trust the voice that comforts you, you'll reject the one that corrects you. If you only welcome the God who keeps you safe, you'll miss the one who sets you free. And freedom doesn't always feel good at first. Sometimes it feels like being stripped. Sometimes it feels like being lost. But it's in that lostness that he teaches you what home really is. There was a moment I thought he had left me. Nothing made sense. Doors closed. My heart went numb. I stopped feeling, stopped trying, stopped praying like I meant it. But now I see it. He wasn't punishing me. He was cleaning the signal. He was untangling me from my own expectations, from my need for clarity, from my obsession with outcomes. He was teaching me to stop performing spirituality and start receiving presence, to stop chasing answers and start resting in the process, to stop asking for a plan and start trusting a person. He wasn't silent, he was shifting me. If you're in that place, confused, tired, numb, you're not broken. You're being rewired. You're not being ignored. You're being invited into a deeper way of listening, one that doesn't rely on signs or feelings or results, but on faith. Faith that whispers, I'm still here, even if I say nothing. God's silence isn't absence. It's space, room for your soul to finally hear. You don't need to do more. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to fix yourself before you listen. You just need to be still, not to find Him, but to remember He never left. You're not chasing God. You're tuning in to what never stops speaking. So if you're tired, that's okay. Don't pray harder, just breathe deeper. Don't strive, just surrender. He's not far, He's just quiet. And maybe that's exactly what you need. Not a new answer, but a new way of listening. And that shift begins now.